What's up, everybody? Rob here. So, as promised, this is part 2 of my reaction to the American Revolution from OverSimplified. To check out part 1, you can check that out in the description below. And also to check out the video without my commentary on it, also that is in the description. Really support OverSimplified. Check them out. They're really hilarious and they're very informative. They do really good stuff. So, any case, as always, I'm just going to be giving my reaction. And yes, I will be stopping along the way, giving my commentary about what's going on and, doing that sort of thing, so just keep that in mind. And yes, I'm perfectly aware that my camera is not that of high quality. I'm not going to turn this into a reaction channel. It's just something I do for fun, so I'm not going to spend any money on a decent camera because I don't care. Okay, so without any further ado, here we go.
This video was made possible by Brilliant, math and science done right. Keep watching until the end of the video to learn how you can get 20% off the annual premium subscription. Washington's butt was sufficiently kicked. Winter was here. His troops' morale was low. Some just up and left. Washington needed to do something, anything to restore faith in the revolution. The British had spread throughout New Jersey and settled in for a winter of drinking cider and partying hard. Nobody expected an attack in the winter, so Washington started making plans for an attack in the winter. The British had hired a large force of Hessian mercenaries from the German states of Hesse-Kassel and Hesse-Hanau to fight the rebels. It was these mercenaries that were stationed across the Delaware River from Washington and his army, and they were
As far as I know, the King of Britain at this time, King of Britain at the time was also one of the elector counts of the German provinces. I know George I was the elector count of Hanover. I believe George III also held that position. So as far as, if I could be mistaken on this, but the Hessians were not so much mercenaries, like they're paid for hire soldiers, so much as they were simply soldiers who worked for the elector, basically their lord, their king. And he was simply, George was simply calling up another group of people that were his loyal subjects to put down a rebellion. So, could be mistaken on that, not positive, but there you go.
more Hessian reinforcements incoming, but they made an unscheduled stop because their commander got thirsty. No, not that kind of thirsty. That kind of thirsty. It was Christmas Eve with a blizzard outside when Washington heard the Hessian defenses were down, and he decided to attack. He made a perilous crossing of the icy Delaware River with 2,400 men and marched 9 miles to Trenton, where he caught the Hessian forces completely off guard. After
America, we will cross a frozen river to attack you in your sleep on Christmas. We've done it.
a short but
America.
fierce battle, the Hessians surrendered in droves. It was a much-needed victory that sent a clear message, not only to the British, but to Americans across the colonies. The war was far from lost. General Cornwallis led the British forces south to counterattack the Americans, but in a series of battles, Washington's defensive positioning and flanking maneuvers defeated the British 3 times in 10 days, and the British decided to abandon southern New Jersey for the rest of the winter. Washington finally set up a winter camp in Morristown, but for the Americans,
Overall, these two battles were very strategically unimportant. The numbers involved, the overall results of them really there were nothing particularly decisive, but they were incredible morale victories. The 1776 was not a good year for the Patriot cause. New York had been lost. The Americans had lost pretty much every battle they had fought in, and things were looking, I'm going to be generous by saying it was bleak. Thomas Paine had to write The Crisis. These are times to try men's souls and fair weather patriots and all that kind of stuff in order to motivate people. But things were looking pretty bad, and winning 2 battles within, I think, like 10 days of each other really gave a much needed morale boost. And I just want to point out the massive risk that was being taken here. This was a Hail Mary on Washington's part. If he failed here, that probably would have been the end of the war. That's it, call it in, America would be under British control, end of story. So big risk, big reward, and it happened to pay off for Washington. So yeah, and again, they spent the rest of the winter in Morristown. Everyone thinks that Valley Forge is the worst now. It's pretty bad in Morristown too. It was not quite as famous as Valley Forge, but Morristown was pretty brutal as well. And the British were living large in New York at the time.
there was much less partying than the British. Elsewhere, the British had taken Newport, Rhode Island, because it was a good naval base. In the south, they failed to take Charleston, South Carolina, which left British loyalists unsupported and vulnerable to more harassment and even mass expulsion. Congress sent Benjamin Franklin to France on a mission to convince them to join the war, and while the French generally loved any opportunity to hoodwink the Brits, they didn't want to join unless it was a sure win. So for now, Franklin spent his days chilling out and chasing tail. The British Parliament couldn't believe the
Yeah, Benjamin Franklin was a pimp. There's really no other way to describe that. For some reason, women just threw themselves at him. He's just a pimp. He also had a preference for older women. Make of that whatever you will.
War wasn't over yet, and the pressure was on to end it. So the British came up with a plan. General Burgoyne in Montreal and General William Howe in New York would advance through the Hudson Valley and meet in the middle, splitting the colonies in two, and thus screwing over the American communication lines. Burgoyne began his movement south, and after taking Fort Ticonderoga quite easily, he then came across heavy American resistance, so he sent Howard Dingle-Dongle asking if he'd be showing up anytime soon. Meanwhile, Howard completely abandoned the plan and gone for all-out personal glory by capturing the American capital, Philadelphia.
Okay, real quick about Burgoyne. He was a rather flamboyant individual. He actually was a playwright, wrote several plays, and one person described him as being all sail and no ballast. So kind of like a way of saying all hat, no cattle. If you're in Texas, that makes sense. But he was all show, but no actual substance there. And they were slowed down partially because this is a very unpopulated area, and a lot of the roads that they were following were basically little more than dirt tracks. And the Patriots would be putting, they'd be cutting down logs and, stacking up rocks in the way, just anything to obstruct their path along the way, which slowed them down. Also, this place is completely mosquito infested and a lot of swampland up there, so it's not easy ground to begin with. And on top of that, Burgoyne, in his infinite flamboyantness, had over 200 carts of personal baggage with him. So that just slowed things down even further. So, yeah, make of that what you will. And also now you got Howe pushing it on Washington, pushing it on Philadelphia. Washington's going to be in his way there. Yeah, I know what's going to happen, but okay.
He defeated Washington and his army at Brandywine Creek by using the old hit him with a decoy and flank him from behind tactic, and Philadelphia was now in British hands, forcing Congress to escape to York. But Burgoyne was left on his own to face the ever-increasing American force in Saratoga. American General Horatio Gates teamed up with our old friend Benedict Arnold to deal one final blow to Burgoyne's army. Arnold wanted to take the fight to the British, but Gates wanted to wait for the British to come to them. After a heated debate, Gates, the senior officer, told Arnold to go to his room, but Arnold defied his orders, and at the Battle of Bemis Heights he charged at the British and obliterated them. Great job, Horatio. By the way, what happened to that other guy who was in Saratoga? Who? Benedict Arnold. Never heard of him. Ouch.
Okay, Benedict Arnold was actually wounded in the leg at Saratoga, and if he had actually, a lot of historians say if instead of being wounded in the leg, if that bullet had hit him in the heart or in the head, he would be remembered by history as one of the greatest heroes of the American Revolution, one of the greatest American patriots of all time. Unfortunately, he survived it and ended up betraying Americans, now being a byword for treason. And actually, at Saratoga, there is a monument to Benedict Arnold's leg, because they wanted to honor the fact that, look, the battle was won because of Arnold and because of the American victory at Saratoga. The French got involved. They thought this was, okay, this potentially could be a winning cause. Let's get involved. So ultimately, Benedict Arnold saved America. However, at the same time, you don't want to honor our greatest traitor, the greatest traitor in American history. So there is a monument to Benedict Arnold's leg, which was wounded at the battle, and the monument does not mention Benedict Arnold by name at all, but there is a monument to Benedict Arnold, or at least his leg. Make of that whatever you will.
Hey, George, didn't I do a great job? Taking Philadelphia and all? Didn't I? You're fired. Both Burgoyne and Howe returned to Great Britain, leaving British General Henry Clinton to take charge of the war. And the war was about to take a nasty turn, because with the victory at Saratoga, the French were finally ready to join the Americans. Alright, Benny, we're in. Hey, isn't this kind of funny? You know, because you're a republic trying to overthrow an absolute monarchy, and I'm an absolute monarchy helping you? Like, could you imagine if your revolution inspired my people to revolt against me, and then they imprisoned me and all my family, and they chopped all of our heads off? Could you imagine? That's called foreshadowing. For now in America...
Okay, yeah, the French had absolutely nothing to gain by this. They weren't going to gain any territory out of this. They weren't going to gain any sort of monetary compensation for this. This was purely done as a way to make the British look bad. And, yeah, that was pretty much it. It's a long time heated rivalry between Britain and France going back, well, if you consider England pre-Britain, but you know what I mean. This is going back centuries upon centuries. These are like the most hated rivals in Europe at the time. And... yeah, eventually the French would shoot themselves in the foot with this. So, yeah.
Winter was here once again, which meant yet more disease, more starvation, and even a little mutiny. After losing Philadelphia, Washington's job was again on the line. But suddenly, a Prussian guy with a very fancy name, hired by Benjamin Franklin, showed up out of nowhere and said, "Hey, I'm here to give your men a
Story
European military training. And train them he did. They learned how to shoot accurately, how to march in formation, where to poop and where not to, and
Yes,
strict
very
punishments were
important.
handed out to any who didn't comply. Washington's army
Okay, a thing about Baron von Steuben. He was a Prussian military officer who basically trained the American, volunteered to help train the Americans. Thing is, he couldn't speak a word of English. He spoke German and he spoke French, and he had to do his work through translators. And he experienced a great deal of frustration with the Americans, saying that these people are too independently minded, and that I can I can tell any European soldier to do something, and he will do it without question. But for an American, I must first explain to him why he must do something before he does something. And he found that very annoying and frustrating. So much so that he would start cursing. He had a completely short temper and would just start cursing out everybody. He would start cursing them out in French. Then he'd start cursing them out in German. Then he'd pull over his translators and say, curse at these men in English, for they will not do what I bid them." So, yeah, he did manage to whip the Americans into shape, and we actually made it into something that resembled a professional fighting force. You know, Prussians are very known for their discipline, their military discipline, and he tried to instill that into the American cause, and he was pretty successful with it. Frustrations aside.
He came out of the winter in 1778 a new and improved force, ready to take Philadelphia back from the British. In the end, though, they didn't have to. With the French entry into the war, the British ordered General Clinton to evacuate Philadelphia and consolidate all of the British forces in New York. So Washington sent Benedict Arnold to reoccupy and secure the city as he pursued the British through New Jersey on land, eventually finding a good opportunity to attack at Monmouth Courthouse. The battle took place on a sweltering hot summer's day, and as many soldiers died from heat stroke as they did from battle. In the end, after some incompetence/borderline treason from Washington's second in command, it was a draw. And in this war, a draw is kind of a victory for the Americans.
Okay, at the Battle of Monmouth, they were showing that General Lee was incompetent, bordering on treason. There's actually a bit of a story here. It's me. There's going to be a long story here. Just work with me. Any case, Lee and Washington hated each other. Lee actually thought that Washington was completely incompetent and that he was, in his words, not fit to command a sergeant's guard, meaning that Washington was completely incapable of the task of controlling the Continental Army. He wanted the job for himself. So what he did was, in this particular battle, he took his men that were under his direct command and he charged them at the British line. He sensed an opportunity there, and he thought, maybe if I act aggressively, I can throw the British off balance and we can win the battle. I win the battle. I look good. I replace Washington. Because there were already murmurs of replacing Washington because he had actually lost more battles than he won, but whatever. Any case, things did not work out at all for him, and not only did his men retreat, Lee was at the head of the retreat. He was on horseback, rushing back towards the American lines, having basically been shattered by the British. And the British were then advancing back towards them as well. So basically, everything was falling apart. Now, Washington saw this, saw Lee leading this retreat, and rode over to him, pulled him aside, and according to now, here's the thing, Washington has an extremely short temper. And he laid into Lee. He started cursing him out. One subordinate said that he cursed at him until the leaves shook on the trees. And he said it was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard in my life. Unfortunately, he was so impressed by what he was hearing that he didn't actually write down what it is Washington has said. So we don't know exactly what he said, but you can use your imagination. In any case, he immediately then relieved Lee of his command, and then he had the problem of Lee's men who were breaking and running. And if you've ever played a Total War game, you know that if one unit breaks, it's only a matter of time before everybody else breaks. So he had to control this. So Washington rode up to them and shouted, and I quote, "Onward, my brave fellows, for the enemy is whipped and we shall have them directly." He then spurred his horse directly towards the British line. Now, I don't know about you, but you have George Washington on a horse charging directly towards the British, alone. You're going to follow him because he's George frickin' Washington charging at the enemy. You're going to have to follow him. If you're an American, you have to do that. And it actually worked. And the men were able to rally, and they reformed and were able to push back the British. And throughout the course of the battle, Washington rode up and down the battle line. He didn't actually charge. He was crazy, but he wasn't suicidal. He didn't charge into the British, but he was riding up and down the battle line. His hat was blown off of him. I think he had 2 or 3 horses shot out from underneath him, and his coat was so full of bullet holes that it was completely useless. It became little more than rags at that point. But he himself was not touched. Throughout his entire military career, not a single wound would ever hurt General Washington. So yeah, make of that whatever he will. I just thought it was a cool story about him. All right, moving on.
Next up, let's talk about this guy. This is John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones is
Completely
handsome,
insane.
Scottish, and absolutely insane. When the war first broke out, everyone was like, how did the colonies expect to stand up to the might of the British Navy with their meager fleet of converted merchantmen? Yeah, try telling that to John Paul Jones. This guy sailed to the
Absolute
British
lunatic.
Isles, somehow captured a British ship off the coast of Ireland, and brought it back to France. Then he returned, attacking more ships, raiding towns, and evading capture the entire time. These are basically pirate tactics. But hey, if it works, it works. In one incident, he captured a British ship and returned to a Dutch port without an official ensign because his was lost during the battle. That's a big no-no and can have you arrested as a pirate. The Dutch helped him out by quickly creating a design based on Benjamin Franklin's description of what the American flag should look like, and they entered it into their records as an official US flag. What they came up with looks pretty cool. The whole campaign probably played heavily on British morale and brought into question their ability to win the war. And fun fact, he was so cool that one of the towns he raided in 1778 gave him an official honorary pardon in 1999. Keep ripping in heaven, John Paul Jones.
Yeah, the
You're
guy
an
was
angel now. What the Continental Navy
was
was
complete
lacking in
lunatic.
resources, though, the French entry into the war made up for. The French began with naval skirmishes in the English Channel, and they sent a large fleet to America, although it sustained a lot of damage in a storm off Rhode Island. The Americans were hoping for a bigger commitment from the French, so John Adams went to France to help Benjamin Franklin continue negotiations. Oh good, you're finally here. Check this out. Hey ladies, I'd like to fly you like a kite, 'cause you're electrifying. Isn't this great? Is this what you've been doing? Yeah, why? We were sent here on a diplomatic mission to secure military support from France, not to philander with the locals. Wait, no, ladies, come back. Worst wingman ever. But the Americans would get...
Yeah, Franklin and Adams had completely diametrically opposed personalities. Franklin was a very outgoing individual who, basically, he was a total man whore. I mean, like, anybody, everybody, like, he didn't care. And Adams was very straight-laced, very business-minded, very serious, and the two clashed constantly, even over something as stupid as because they had to share a room, should we have the window open or closed? And they would go on hour-long arguments over whether or not the window should be open or closed or not. So the two were just, it's like the buddy cop movie From Hell. Yeah, it would have been hilarious to watch, but yeah.
some more help. The Dutch provided aid, although they never formed an official alliance. More significantly though, the Spanish, who had already been providing aid, officially joined the war in June 1779. They would provide support in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast, campaigns that heavily impacted the Native American tribes in those areas. Both sides actually enlisted the help of Native American tribes throughout the war, sometimes even pitting those tribes against each other.
Yep.
In the summer of 1779, after a series of raids against the Americans by the Iroquois, Washington organized an expedition that burned down more than 40 villages, forcing the tribes to relocate to Canada for British protection. And another group that shouldn't go unmentioned were African Americans.
Just want to say that because of this raid that Washington ordered against the Iroquois, for many years, decades, if not centuries afterwards, the Iroquois word for president of the United States translates to the burner of villages. So yeah, they were basically caught between a rock and a hard place with this one. You know, it basically had the British on one side, the Americans on the other side, and neither of them really had their best interests in mind. So yeah, they basically had to choose the lesser of two evils, and they were torn. It would cause all kinds of chaos within various Native American communities because of this.
Americans, both free and enslaved. They joined both sides of the war, hoping to gain their freedom. But afterwards, many were simply returned to slavery, particularly those who had fought for the Americans. Despite owning slaves himself, Jefferson had written a condemnation of slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but out of fear of offending the southern colonies, this was removed from the final draft. For the same reason, the American Army stopped enlisting African American men in 1775, a policy that Washington, a slave owner himself, supported, but they were forced to reverse the policy after the British promised freedom to any slaves who joined them. In general, you stood a better chance of gaining freedom if you fought for the British. However, even those that left with the British after the war suffered mistreatment and discrimination in their new lives outside of America. Our good friend Benedict
Ad coming in 3, 2, 1. Okay, yeah, it's the treatment of African Americans is a blight on American history. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's one of the big dark spots in American history, and it's only something that we need to confront as Americans. We need to confront that and be honest with ourselves here. It hasn't been the best. Honestly, it hasn't been the best we can do. But at the same time, and this is all political, I don't want to turn this into a political thing, to use that as a cudgel to promote your own ideology over past events is also equally wrong. So we need to confront these things. We've made mistakes in the past. Slavery is a blight on American history. At the same time, though, we have to move forward. We are all Americans. We're all on the same side here, hopefully. And we just hopefully can move on from that. And hopefully make America even better than it is now. America! All right, and there's going to be an ad in 3 seconds.
Arnold is now in charge of Philadelphia. Having a good time?
This is... Ooh, a vacuum cleaner. That will end in twice the suction of any cord-free vacuum. War Thunder. Okay, I'm skipping because I don't care.
Parting down with and even marrying a member of the Philadelphia elite.
She's a loyalist, by the way. Her family had loyalist sympathies. You can see where this is headed.
The same elite that had partied down with the British when they controlled the city. And suddenly, the people of Philadelphia, including the state governor, started accusing Arnold of having pro-British sentiments.
You get it at this
People happy.
point.
Washington wrote a letter rebuking Arnold, calling his conduct imprudent and improper, and that was too many ouchies for Benedict Arnold to handle. He asked Washington to put him in charge of the fort at West Point. Then he contacted the British, offering to hand the plans of the fort over to them and join their side. Our good friend Benedict Arnold is our good friend no more. Luckily, the treasonous plans were discovered on a captured British officer, but Arnold managed to escape before he was arrested. As a British brigadier general, he would go on to lead raids against American cities, most notably his raid of Richmond, Virginia in 1781. His betrayal shook George Washington, who had once again set up camp at Morristown. His leadership...
Okay, going into Benedict Arnold. This is kind of a long thing right here, but I figured I need to explain it because it's a very interesting story. So you might want to fast forward, just watch the thing. When it starts moving again, then you can, start it up again. But I'm going to be explaining Benedict Arnold and his treason because it's a little more complex than that, a little more, just some things I want to add in. Now, West Point is on the Hudson River, and it basically controls the Hudson Valley. And whoever controls the Hudson River, if you control Hudson River, you can cut off the New England colonies from the rest of the colonies. So it's probably, I wouldn't say the key to the continent, but one of the most important spots in North America at this point. And the Patriots knew it. It was under Patriot control at this point. And the way they were able to control the Hudson was that there was a chain. If you remember Game of Thrones, Battle of Blackwater, there was a great chain that was set across the river. They can lower it and raise it. They had winches on both sides, and you can raise this chain. And if you try to send ships up there, try to force like a flotilla up there, they would simply raise the chain, and if they were lucky, it would hit in the chain and tear the bottom completely out and sink the ship. If not, it would, whatever ship hits it would get snagged on the chain, and on both sides were gun emplacements. And they would just then, this ship that was floundering there would just get pounded into oblivion. And in order to protect this chain, there was a series of forts, and then the forts were also surrounded by more forts and blockhouses and defensive installations. And so West Point was not really seen so much as a single location, but rather an entire military complex. And he who controls West Point basically controlled the Hudson River. And everybody knew this. Now, Arnold asked to be transferred to West Point because his leg had not healed properly, which was true. He was wounded at Saratoga. So he asked to be transferred up there and take command, and Washington sent him there. And that's when he started the correspondence with the British. And what he said he was going to do is not only would he turn over the fort to the British, but what he'd do is he would deliberately weaken the garrisons of all these various forts and blockhouses. So he would send men further and further afield, say on woodcutting expeditions or on hunting expeditions, since the Hudson Valley is full. It's pretty filled with game and lots of provisions. You can easily keep yourself well supplied there. So he kept sending his men further and further afield. So when the British did show up, he would turn it over to them, but at the same time, should there be any resistance, anybody say, no, we're not going to give up, we're not going to surrender, the garrisons would be so undermanned the British can just roll right over them anyway. So at this point, there was a go-between. There was an envoy, the British officer that got captured there, a guy by the name of Major John Andre. John Andre, very flamboyant individual. There was actually, if you remember, Howe got replaced. There was a going away party for him called the Mischianza, which was even to this day, the most expensive party ever thrown in America. I might do a video on that one. In any case, John Andre was the guy who organized this, so he had a flair for the dramatic. And however, in spite of his flair for the dramatic, he did not have a flair for secret spy stuff. And what he did was, well, pretty stupid. He when he was carrying these messages back and forth, in one particular incident, he took off his military coat. He didn't have this coat. He wanted to be as inconspicuous as possible. Now, that seems like a minor point, or actually would seem like a good idea, except when he got captured, he was captured basically wearing civilian clothes. Therefore, he is not a military envoy, but rather a spy, and therefore the laws and customs of war do not apply to him. So he was captured with the plans in his boot by these patriot sympathizing highwaymen who basically said, like, hi, I'm Benedict Arnold. He's carrying Benedict Arnold's letter. Hi, I'm Benedict Arnold. I would like to betray West Point to the British and completely turn over, this key to British control, And they said, oh, this is kind of important. So they immediately contacted other Americans who, the word would spread really quickly. Washington basically panicked and reinforced the garrison real quick. Arnold had to out of there. Now, the reason why it's important that Andre was in civilian clothes is because he was now no longer an official envoy, which means he was a spy, which means they were going to hang him. And as a military envoy, like an official envoy like that, you would get certain treatment. Like, you don't just hang guys for this sort of thing. But he wasn't wearing his uniform, so they hung him, or they were going to hang him. And the British protested, saying he is an official envoy. The Americans said, well, he was out of uniform, so it doesn't count. But Washington said, I'll make a deal with you. I'll give you Andre back. That's no problem. I want Arnold. Turn Arnold over to us. You can have Andre. And the British refused. And so because of this, John Andre got a long drop with a short rope, thusly ending his very, very interesting life. So in any event, that's pretty much the story of Washington, of Arnold and John Andre and the betrayal of West Point. Anyway, there you go. Moving on. A long explanation for a short thing, but it's me we're talking about.
Somehow held the Continental Army together through the harshest winter of the war. We're entering 1780, and Parliament was hopping mad that the war still wasn't over. The British debt was soaring, and despite taking parts of Massachusetts in late 1779, the North was in a stalemate, so the British decided to make a major shift in strategy to the south, an economically rich area with a higher level of support for the British, or so the British thought. A year earlier, they had captured the underdefended city of Savannah, Georgia easily, and a joint American-French counter-siege failed. Now, they laid siege to Charleston, South Carolina. It fell within months, with thousands of American troops surrendering to the British, a costly defeat. The British quickly moved to take control, and they sent stereotypical Hollywood villain with a British accent Bannister the Butcher Tarleton into the backcountry, where he hunted down rebels and destroyed them with ruthless brutality. The British presence also inspired local loyalist militias in the backcountry to rise up against their persecutors. The British really seemed to be onto something with their new strategy, and the ball was very much in Washington's court. I'm gonna send my most loyal general, Nathaniel Greene, to the south to stop the British. Gonna have to overrule you there, George. We're sending Hero of Saratoga and your biggest rival, Horatio Gates. Watch this, George. I'm gonna save the day again, everybody will love me, and I'm gonna get your job. Here I go. And he got into one battle with Cornwallis, got annihilated, and ran away. Alrighty, let's go with your guy. Nathaniel Greene knew the British outnumbered his own forces and wouldn't be defeated with conventional tactics, so he had to think outside the box. He split his army into two, said, hey big boy, look at me, and then they went running in two different directions. Cornwallis sent Tarleton after Morgan, and he caught up.
This is the extremely historically accurate movie. The Patriot is based on the clash between Morgan and Tarleton. It didn't happen at all the way it happened historically. Just bringing that up. This is going to be the battle. Tarleton and Morgan. What's the battle? What's the name of that battle? It's like a battle. I'm extreme. I know exactly how it worked out. I forgot the name of it, but anyway, big Patriot victory here. And Greene, he would keep losing, but he would manage to keep his army intact. They basically was just leading Cornwallis around the southern colonies, just whittling him down, frustrating him, making him, Cornwallis was winning victories, but none of them were ever decisive enough to actually, win the war.
With him at Cowpens, where Morgan proceeded to kick Tarleton's butt. Then the two led Cornwallis on a wild.
It was pretty much, deliberately collapsed. He had his center filled with militiamen who were pretty much unreliable. And then when they fell back under the British regulars, the British fell into the pocket, and then he counterattacked with regular troops. And, Morgan was able to defeat. Basically, he suckered them in and then hit him with a massive counterpunch. So, pretty interesting battle.
wild chase through North Carolina.
Yeah,
His
wild
bigger
chase
and
there.
better equipped army much heavier and slower than Greene's quick and mobile troops. Greene led Cornwallis further and further from his supply line, then crossed the Dan River into Virginia, picked up some reinforcements, and turned back to face the now exhausted British. At the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, the two sides engaged in vicious close combat. Cornwallis, fearing loss, fired his big guns into the chaotic fighting, cutting down many of his own men. Greene retreated, giving Cornwallis the victory, but Cornwallis lost a quarter of his men in the fighting, so it felt much more like a British defeat. At this point, both sides desperately needed something to happen.
Yeah, that was a desperation move from Cornwallis. He gave the order, fire upon friend and foe alike, and the Americans later on would say something along the lines of, look, if that's what if that's a British victory, we'll give them all the victories they want, or something of that nature. It's like, yeah, if that's a British victory, we'll take it. So
Soon to end the fighting. The British were running out of money, while the Americans were again facing mutinies as the men went without pay or even basic living needs. Fortunately, the Frenchmen
I just find the animation of them hilarious.
now showing up in greater numbers and were ready to fight.
easily
After his
amused.
encounter with Greene, Cornwallis decided the only way to win the South was to first prevent the Southern Continental Army from using Virginia as a supply base. So he abandoned the Carolinas, moving to Wilmington and on to Yorktown, a position the British believed would
kind
be
of
easy to
important.
supply and support. On his march to Yorktown, he raided many farms, stealing horses and supplies from the locals, but also freeing thousands of slaves, many of whom joined him. The French saw Cornwallis's new position as an opportunity to land a decisive blow on the British. Washington wanted to attack Clinton in New York, but the French said it was a really dumb idea. And to be fair, it was. Instead, Washington sent out fake
very well.
dispatches to make
Yeah, the British had been entrenched in Washington since more or less 1776 at this point, so they've been there for 1781. I'm bad at math, 5 years. And they pretty much had defenses all the way around, so attacking would be, you're doing a frontal attack against entrenched defenses on an island against the largest navy in the world. Not the best of ideas. So it's like, yeah, let's not do that.
it look like they would attack Clinton, but secretly their combined force marched all the way down to Virginia. A large French fleet under the command of Comte de Grasse arrived and successfully cleared the British Navy out of the Chesapeake Bay. The combined land and naval forces then laid siege to Cornwallis's army in Yorktown. The American and French forces tightened in around the city, raining artillery down on Cornwallis, who desperately appealed to Clinton for aid, but Clinton was unusually chilled out about the whole thing. Cornwallis held out for nearly a month before he had no choice but to surrender. Over 7,000 British troops were captured, a crushing defeat, and with that, Parliament had reached the end of its rope. The war just wasn't worth it, and it needed to end now. The British still held New York, Charleston, and Savannah, but fighting between the two sides mostly ceased as peace negotiations opened up in Paris. The resulting treaty in 1783 saw
When they say fighting mostly ended, the key word there is mostly. The fighting would continue on, but it was mostly low-level skirmishes. During the course of negotiations, you wanted to negotiate from a position of strength. So there was a lot of skirmishes trying to gain little bits of territory, but at the same time, everybody knew that the war was essentially over, so let's not be overly risky with one another. So a lot of low-intensity conflicts for the next 2 years until the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. And honestly, the way it worked out for the British, though, they were more worried about the French and the Spanish, and the Dutch never officially declared war, but they were there and had to be dealt with that as well. But they thought, like, that's an actual priority. Let's worry about that. Let's not worry about the colonies. Like, that's a minor issue. We got bigger problems. Like, France is right there. Like, they're right across the channel. That's an actual possible existential threat to us. The colonists, not so much.
Great Britain remove its troops from American soil, recognize U.S. independence, and cede territory up to the Mississippi River. In return, the Americans agreed to pay any debt still owed to Britain and gave fair treatment to any colonists who had remained loyal to the crown. The Spanish got Florida, while the French got an economic crisis that led to its own revolution a decade later. Washington retired to his home in Mount Vernon, wishing his men farewell by saying,
just to say, overall, the winners of the war were the Americans and the Spanish. The losers were the French, and the British actually had a kind of a mixed bag here. They lost because they lost the colonies. The French, Americans won because they got independence. The Spanish got Florida and other territories as well, so it worked out well for them. The French lost because they got nothing out of this except an economic crisis, which led to the French Revolution, and we all know how that worked out for them. But the British, yes, they lost the colonies, and they lost the war technically, but as part of the negotiations, the Americans were automatically uploaded back into the British trade network. So the British were able to get all of the benefits of American trade without actually having to spend any money to administer colonies there. So overall, it actually did work out pretty well for them. And just to point out that the war that was started, yes, there was peace between the British and the American colonists, but the war between the French and the Spanish and the British continued on for some time afterwards. And actually, the last shot of the war would be fired in Cuddalore, India, which actually secured British control over India and wedged out all of the other rivals. So the British kind of had a mixed. Yes, they technically lost, but it didn't work out all that badly for them. The French got screwed with this one here.
I most devoutly wish that your latter days may be as prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and honorable. He hoped to live out the rest of his days in peace, but unfortunately for him, a number of people wanted him to be the first leader of the new country. And by a number of people, I mean literally everyone. The first election campaign in American history was basically a grassroots effort to convince Washington to accept the office. He was sworn in on April 30th, 1789, and he himself established many of the standards and limitations of what the American leader should be. First of all, there was debate on what he should be called. Is he a king? Is he our glorious leader? In the end, they went for a word that at the time was pretty modest. President, like the president of your local bowling club or office bake sale committee. He set up a cabinet of expert advisors, knowing that no president could know everything, no matter how much of a stable genius they claimed to be. He proposed major legislation to Congress and gave an annual State of the Union address to keep his own power in check. He stated that the U.S. should remain neutral in foreign conflicts, and in the end, he voluntarily gave up his power after just 2 terms. He could have made the presidency anything he wanted, but his careful and cautious actions helped set the precedent of an office that is powerful in its limitations, decisive through its diplomacy, and respected in its humility. And so the United...
George III actually said about Washington when he learned that Washington gave up power after the 2 terms, basically voluntarily steps aside. He said that there's no doubt that he is the greatest man that ever lived. So, yeah, even the British had a tremendous amount of respect for Washington. And I believe upon his death, the Royal Navy flew their colors at half-mast for him. So, remarkable generation of people, and Washington was a remarkable individual in and of himself. So,
the United States was born, and everything was perfect. It had no problems, not a single one. Certainly nothing that would, I don't know, cause such an extreme divide that it would lead to a civil war.
Yeah, it's minor detail.
Anyway, moving on. Quick quiz. Name the most American thing you can think of.
Guns, apple pie, bacon flavored apple pie cooked with the heat generated from an automatic machine gun.
Bald eagles, calling the winner of
Having a bald eagle deliver you the guns, bacon, and apple pie.
An America-only sports tournament, world champions? Or maybe math and science? Wait, math and science?
Yes, we're better at the rest of the world than that too. America! Yes, we are that awesome.
That's right. If you didn't know, science is as American as combining chicken with waffles. And
chicken and waffles is good. If you've never had it, it is freaking awesome.
Don't just take my word for it. Ask Thomas Jefferson. Of course, to do that you would need a time machine, and that would take some math and a lot of science. If you want to deeply understand math and science, so you want to calculate the age of the universe, take a crack at special relativity, or just train your critical thinking with some fun logic puzzles, then you've got to check out Brilliant. Brilliant guides you through a whole host of fascinating topics by breaking them down and getting you to actively solve problems in an experience that is interactive, addictive, and so easy to understand. This intuitive approach makes it appropriate for students,
I'm just gonna let it play because
enthusiasts
it's good for
all
them.
over the world. To support OverSimplified and learn more about Brilliant,
there you go. Check that out because these guys
and sign
do
up
good
for
work.
free. And the first 200 people to use our link, which can also be found in the description below, will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. So check it out now.
There you go. All right, and that's it. So yeah, there you go. The American Revolution from OverSimplified. I thought it was really fun. They do really good work. So if you haven't checked out their other stuff, by all means do so. I'm not going to be turning this into a reaction channel. I'm not going to be reacting from anymore. Somebody recommended that I do I react to the Cold War. My previously established opinions of communists may color that a little bit. So it might be interesting, but I don't need any tanky showman up in my timeline here. So yeah. In any case, it was a lot of fun. I hope you found this interesting, entertaining. I know I did. In any case, please hit the like and subscribe button. More videos from me will be coming out, to be honest, whenever I get around to it. And have a good day. Or don't have a good day. Your adults have any kind of day you want. See you later.